of November, and it's 8:40 in Beijing and 7:40 in Ohio. And we have obviously with us Zhen Wei, our co-host. Yeah, cool. Welcome everyone, and welcome Jin. Yeah, man, good to have you. Good to have you back again.
Good to be here.
So yeah, obviously last week was our first episode, talking about the news, talking about the headlines, covering what different communist parties are saying, workers' parties as well, and the general headlines, obviously around the world, what different people are doing and saying and what's happening. This week, obviously COP is still on, the climate change conference, but there's also been the anniversary, the 104th anniversary of
the November Revolution. October,
October, of course, October Revolution.
But in November, right?
In November. So yes, we're going to be covering COP, the climate summit, sort of the conclusions of it, or what we have so far, as well as some other stuff in relation to Russia and Belarus, the Sandinistas, and some of the joint declarations from CPs around the world. So I think we should start with the COP26. Let's talk about the climate change stuff first. I think that's probably the biggest story. It's obviously quite existential, quite important.
Right.
From the New York Times, obviously, this is just coming out now. So apparently the US and China have agreed to work together to tackle climate change. This is not obviously the last deal or last piece of information that will come out of the conference, or the last declaration to combat climate change. But apparently some ground has been broken. For the first time, it seems that China will commit to reducing methane, which is obviously important. Last week talked about this, Jen, about the fact that carbon, of course, is very important to capture carbon, but methane is a far more potent greenhouse gas, and obviously that comes from cattle. Lots of it comes from cattle. Any thoughts on this one, Jen?
Well, there's a few things I immediately thought of. First of all is in various countries, the classification of what is considered renewable or clean energy. Natural gas, for example, in the United States is considered completely acceptable as just straight up clean and renewable energy. But as you've just mentioned, the methane is actually is quantitatively the second largest greenhouse gas, right beneath carbon dioxide, and in terms of potency, even more than carbon dioxide. So that's not good, because right now, much of the world's so-called transfer of transition, to clean energy is just switching from coal to natural gas. That's all they've been doing. All 5 continents virtually. So China making that promise, that is good. Now it is also we also have to. There's a huge kind of underlying factor, elephant in the room, if you will, which is the COVID, the impact of COVID that has on transport, logistics, supplies, and therefore emission. Essentially, it comes down to a few levels. One, all over the world, due to some sort of quarantine, or whether voluntary, just like people kind of out of their own concerns, or if it is some level of coordination and enforcement, all around the world, traveling has decreased. Therefore, emission decreases. We've seen many oil crisis where oil pipelines and oil ships, tankers on the ocean, just had their oils not purchased from buyers, and just oil sitting in ships and pipes.
Right. Yes.
Right. So in that sense, then it is leads to a decrease in emission. And that kind of breaks down the supply chain, because oceanic maritime channels is seeing a traffic jam, right? Because some ships are inoperable, essentially. We saw the massive destruction of transport cargo ships in ports in the Middle East in 2021. due to the fallout of this, we see unemployment due to inflation and the world's inability to continue to organize labor safely all across the board in most countries. With the exception of China, DPRK, Cuba, of course. So what does that mean? That means that the world has decreased in emission due to a very, very negative reason of economic crisis, unemployment, and supply chain failures, and worldwide fuel traffic jam, if you can even call it that.
Yes.
So then where does that put China into? Well, China is right now the only place where you can safely and cheaply organize production, mass production right now, because of China's absolute and total zero tolerance policy towards COVID, and how it has already been set up in a position to be the centralized industrial hub of the world. So to then take this kind of to then just look at pure emissions and to say, China promises this, but China has increased in emission and everybody else has decreased in emission. That's I would warn against that, because the world didn't really decrease emission for a good reason.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, it's not intentional. It's just COVID.
It wasn't planned, right?
Right.
Yeah. I guess I'd say a couple things on this one. I mean, obviously, as I said at the beginning, it's not the last we are going to hear of this. COP is not finished yet, right, and the deals that have been that are coming into existence, there's still going to be, the details will be hashed out for probably months to come. I mean, obviously, on the whole, it looks still quite good, though, that China and the US have made a deal, or are busy making a deal. Obviously, since obviously with Trump from 2016 onwards, right. This kind of stuff of making a deal with China was famously in the word Trump not something that he wanted to do, or we had a bad deal with China.
If I may, it's one of the few things that China and the US actually has a common interest on these days.
Yes,
that's one of the lines that's repeated by diplomats from both sides. What are the common interests? Anti-terrorism, stability of the Middle East, and the whole Afghanistan situation, and environment. That's it.
Yeah, that's pretty much it, right?
Right.
Apart from that, everything else becomes a bit more shaky. Yeah. So
right.
You can certainly agree on climate change.
Right.
So thankfully, we're seeing the beginnings of a deal here. I mean, there's a couple of things to say on COP26, which is quite interesting. I mean, so the UK has pledged a lot of money to South Africa to switch from coal. I think the expression that Boris Johnson used was that South Africa has the most expensive energy network in the world, and also it's completely coal based. But there's still lots of power cuts in South Africa, so it's the most expensive and also not very efficient. But there's lots of reasons for that. But yeah, the UK has pledged some money for this too, which I suppose is good to transition.
I would like to just point out and make a very definitive statement that this kind of aid is a part of the reason that the underdeveloped and overexploited world is unable to transition on a clean and modern state of existence, or operation at least. Because so if we all remember to say Thomas Sankara's famous saying, I'm paraphrasing it here, of how just giving money and food, that's not aid.
Yeah. No, that's
when you give essentially the tools means production, tractors and educators to teach people in math and say systems management, that kind of stuff, and engineering and tools maintenance, and educate the workers, that's aid.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's the same thing here. Starvation and climate change is hugely linked. It is no surprise that the Western nations' approaches will always just be, here's some money now, now get out of my face.
Right.
That's it.
Sure. All right. So I think in terms of specifically on COP and on climate change, we're probably going to be covering this again next week. So
Right.
let's cover some of the other headlines too, since this one's going to be coming up for a few more weeks at least. And it is an important issue, but I think we haven't really got any major breakthrough yet. So I think next week, if there is a big deal that comes out, we can go through more of the detail of that deal. And it's still going to be interesting to see where Saudi Arabia and Australia and lots of these countries that are dragging their heels, to put it sort of described in some way. Okay. Yeah. So sticking with China more specifically, we've got obviously the story from the New York Times about the EU sending a delegation, not an official delegation, to Taiwan. So obviously the EU as a whole and many of the countries within the EU, France, Germany, UK, obviously recognize and have adopted the One China policy and accepted the PRC and the Chinese Communist Party as the government of China as a whole, and that includes obviously the Taiwan question too.
Yeah.
But some lawmakers, some European lawmakers from Brussels, made a sort of unofficial delegation visit to Taiwan, which is obviously quite a development. This is not something that happens usually. They try and avoid upsetting Beijing. What are your thoughts on this one, Jen?
A few things. Let's go from macro to micro then.
Okay.
The overall strategic picture is that China and mainland and China, Taiwan all see themselves as China, the only China, and it's still just locked in a civil war that has been on a massive ceasefire for the past at least 3 to 4 decades. There has been Taiwanese ROC special forces raids on Chinese coastal villages and so on and so forth. But besides that, on the whole, it has been a downgrade of violence towards peace, to where right now China and the island of Taiwan can commerce, right? So and people can choose to study and work on the other side, and so on and so forth. But remember that it is still a war of reunification. It is the last stage of the Chinese Civil War that is unfinished. So according to ROC, in quotes, language, it would be like to reclaim the war to reclaim the continent. In our language of People's Republic of China, it would be the last stage of the liberation and reunification of China. Actually, both sides will say reunification of China. That's an inevitable goal. That is the inevitable intention of both sides. And so, therefore, it is simply a question of whichever side grows stronger into military, economically, and politically to a critical mass, then reunification will happen. And that's not a... that's why Taiwan, the province of Taiwan, island of Taiwan, calls itself the Republic of China instead of just the Republic of Taiwan.
I was going to say that. Just, for anyone watching or listening, there's when you speak to... I call them foreigners. I'm in China, so I call people like me foreigners. Right. But they generally, someone who isn't necessarily well versed in this topic will go, yes, Taiwanese independence. We should talk about that. And one of the things that they don't really know is that the official name of that's
country, against their own constitution.
No, sure, and yeah, there's a lot more to it. But just on a superficial level, what is the name of that country? It's officially the ROC, the Republic of China. So if you just start from that point of that superficial fact that it calls itself China, this conversation about whether it's a part of China or this idea of independence, it really is quite flawed in many respects. But yes, as you say, in the constitution and also in the Kuomintang, their policy still is to reunify and to go back, join. It's some form.
So, but obviously, right. Then it is the inevitable overall trend of history for reunification to happen, one way or the other. It's just that the other of ROC somehow coming back to the mainland, that's highly unrealistic. You might as well not consider it as a possibility. So what does this mean? That means that reunification of not just the Chinese nation, the Chinese Sino-civilization and its tradition for 5,000 years, that's inevitable. If you just look at Chinese history, what's the first sentence of the book, Romance of the Three Kingdoms, right? The great trends of the realm, unification, unity to division, division to unity.
Unity, division.
So right now we're in the stage of division to unity.
Right. I see.
Right.
Okay.
So then everybody knows this. Everybody understands this. Western politicians at least got through their law schools. They at least understand the importance of laws and where does the legitimacy of laws came from. So they do understand this. This is where the whole EU aggression and the US aggression of sending delegates, whatever government or party official to Taiwan to visit Taiwan. That's where that comes in. Essentially, understanding that it is inevitable, then quite simply, they want to see the unification in a way to happen in a way that drains China, that makes China enter a worst-case scenario situation, politically, militarily, domestically, internationally, so on and so forth. That's what they want to see. So their whole plan is to essentially make China look as awkward as possible, try to start as much aggression as possible, try to not cover Western aggression as much as possible, try to twist the narrative through various media tools to say, Republic of Taiwan, or some nonsense like that, right? That's because material reality is not on their side. This is all they can do, and this is the optimal outcome for them. So now it's just essentially the up to the decision-making wisdom and the proper philosophical dialectical understanding of the situation of the Chinese PRC leadership would be needed to make sure that it is a soft landing, not a hard crash.
Sure. Yeah, I mean the unification, reunification peacefully would be far more preferable for everyone. Yeah, right. Yeah. I think just a couple things I'd like to mention on this one is in the articles talking about this visit by the EU members of the European Parliament, unofficial visit, is this term that keeps coming up, which I've never in my life heard before. It's a new thing, the Indo-Pacific, this region that's been invented, right? So we are
NATO jargon.
Right. Well, this is it, right? So we were interviewing Paul Cockshott for our podcast.
Yep.
And he said, at the time when they formed NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, people also thought that was strange. They'd never heard of this thing. There's no such thing as the North Atlantic. I mean, it's sure it exists as an ocean, but no one calls himself, yes, I'm from the North Atlantic. That's my identity. It's not these are made up geopolitical terms. So the new one, the latest one, is the Indo-Pacific area, which I mean, I don't know. In all the years I've learned geography, it was never taught the Indo-Pacific. It was never one thing.
I'd like to go over a few rather interesting things. European, especially European and NATO countries that borders Russia. And just NATO countries, European NATO countries in general, have this tradition of essentially stirring up troubles with Soviet Union and now Russia or Belarus as a means of acquiring more funding from the Americans. Because look, a big bad guy over there. Now, with the fall of the Soviet Union, they had to find someone. It used to be Russia because they are distantly close, but also now China was not powerful enough militarily to be of this kind of relevance, but now it is. So what you will see is, especially in countries like Lithuania, Latvia, so on and so forth, there will be politicians their whole life's work would be starting up drama with Russia and now China, getting book deals for book deals that's worth hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars, and then retiring at the ripe old age of 37 and 40 into their nice Baltic Sea mansions, and getting invited to speak and attend at different foundations and think tanks that belongs to NATO. That's it. That's the easy way to enjoy the champagne, caviar, cigar life. So of course they would. Out of their own interest, of their own personal cuts that they're taking from it, and for getting more money to their departments, of course they would do something like this.
So the Indo-Pacific region, right? And I mean, we don't want to go too much into this. There's a lot to discuss about that. About politicians on the periphery, Poland, Lithuania, Latvia, prodding the bear or prodding the dragon, to get the eagle to save us, or the lion, the British lion, whatever, whichever metaphor you want to use. But at the same time, I think this is something that has always been in U.S. strategic thinking. It's Brzezinski and whatnot. They're talking about never let a Eurasian bloc form, a strong, unified Eurasian bloc.
Okay. I do have something to say on that real quick.
I'm sure you do. Yes, obviously China and Russia, the closer, the more bound they are, more allied they are, as well as other nations like Iran and whatnot. This is a death knell for U.S. as well as British imperialism and Western imperialism. It is their greatest fear, and obviously this is what we're seeing with language like Indo-Pacific and the Quad and also, just to go on specifically, we're talking about the a European parliamentary delegation visiting Taiwan, and something to note here. We're talking about a Eurasian bloc forming, whether it's the SCO or just a China-Russia kind of bloc. On the other side, as we've seen with this submarine deal, the failed submarine deal, which has really pissed off the French, to put it lightly. You were seeing it quite a disarray, and even within the European Union, there isn't a solid consensus yet. I mean, obviously they still all recognize PRC, but for example, the UK has sailed an aircraft carrier through the Taiwan Strait in September, which was very provocative. But Germany, for instance, has chosen not to. They don't want. They've sent their ships around, and obviously, yes, the French are quite angry with their other Western friends right now because of a very big deal, the loss of a very big submarine deal. But yeah, go ahead if you want to add your final comments on that one, and then we can move on.
A few hilarious things. One, the British, what you mentioned is essentially the philosophy of divide and conquer. It's what is needed to maintain imperialism and just capitalism in general. From the perspective of capitalist bosses dividing their workers so that they don't unionize and organize against the boss, all the way to the imperialist powerhouse dividing the world. It was first formalized into strategy back in, I believe, the mid to late 1800s by British strategists. It's called splendid isolation. That's what it's called.
Splendid isolation. That sounds very British. Yeah.
It's the idea that but essentially you do not let the continental Europe unify. Anytime a big force is about to unify Europe, you side with the other smaller powers to defeat it. And you just keep doing it, rinse and repeat. So now clearly America, because it's out of the same Anglo-Saxon kind of political tradition and imperialist tradition, it's just carrying all that banner proudly. So that's just what it's doing. So that's also why you see such disunity in Europe. With I would argue that why some British politicians agree to say Brexit. Now, as of the division within Europe, that's something that Britain enjoys to seeing, and also you can break it down to a few layers. First layer is economic interest. Are you a part of the French dominance or German dominance in terms of economic spheres and influence? Or are you looking for a breakaway to, say, free yourself from the oligarchy that is you either choose to be dominated by British or German or French economy? Economic presence. Then say you can do what Serbia did, which is you can choose China. Through the One Belt and One Road. So different countries that benefits differently will have different economic incentives within EU to say to respond to China differently. Because last comment throughout that whole event, I do want to just bring in the most hilarious and comical European participation in the South China Sea. Spain. They brought in, in accordance with the will of the United States to bring in naval warships to South China Sea, but they brought in their ceremonial Columbus era ceremony ship that is a sailboat. I forgot the name of the thing, but
that's fine. So they brought in Age of Conquest wooden sailboat. Flagship. Okay, fine. And
did a circle and left. Very cool. Just had to.
Where exactly did they circle? Did they go around Taiwan or
no? Just in the general South China Sea vicinity.
Okay.
Yeah. So that shows again how different economic incentives can lead to different responses.
Yeah, it's sometimes quite funny, some of the the theatrics that undertake in order to communicate a message, right? But it's a very expensive and bizarre message to spend. Let soldiers sit on a boat for months so that you can make some sort of statement. But anyway, we're going to have to come back to the China, Russia, Eurasia geopolitics when we come at the end of the section. So let's just cover communist parties. What have communist parties been saying around the world? Different messages and things. So obviously today we can't cover everything. There's lots of communist parties around the world and workers' parties. But obviously the Brazilian CP has just held its 16th Congress. Well done to them. Good for them. We're going to be talking to you about what the CP of Kazakhstan has just released, which is a statement which is with 18 other communist parties and workers' parties from 16 different countries about chemical weapons, about American biological laboratories. We'll come to that in a moment. Yeah, a couple other messages. Obviously, the CP of Australia has sent a greeting to the Congress of the CP of Great Britain, the CPB, sorry. CP of India has obviously released a report on there was an incident there. I think someone was killed at a protest. There's a message obviously from the CP of Luxembourg and the CP of Communist Party of Germany and Luxembourg and Netherlands, obviously talking about climate change. And then another message from the CP of Chile in relation to the October 25th coup in Sudan, which we also covered last week. Just a small joke I'd like to make. Obviously, it's quite. Who would have thought, Jen, that communists are having meetings? The CP of Australia has gathered to make a greeting for the Congress of the CPB. So yes, a meeting to send a message for another Congress on the other side of the
world. Everything has to be a meeting, and how many communists does it take to change a light bulb? 3, because 3 forms the party.
Yes, that's it.
Yes.
That's it. But yeah. So this let's cover something we need to cover, which is very important.
Yeah.
It was the 104th anniversary of the Bolshevik Revolution, or the Great October Socialist Revolution. So we shall now all stand and
sing International.
No, not today. But But yeah, of course, very important anniversary. Probably the most important anniversary. I will actually just read for you the message from the CP of the Russian Federation. It's not too long, but I think we should just obviously honor the Bolshevik Revolution. So let's just read here. So this is from the Communist Party of the Russian Federation on the 104th anniversary of the Great October Socialist Revolution. So 104 years have passed since Russian proletariat and peasantry, led by Lenin's Bolshevik Party, took power and laid the foundations of the first socialist country in the world, the USSR. Just bear in mind that this is written in this is a translation, so excuse the poor English if there is some. But yeah, October victory appeared to be the real breakthrough towards socialism, the only authentic fair system in the world. It opened a new era of revolutionary renewal of the world, its transition from capitalism to socialism. The Soviet experience has vividly demonstrated the basic advantage of socialism for working people, along with a unique system of social guarantees created in the USSR. Thanks to the Socialist Revolution and the Soviet state, new generations have grown up being unaware of hunger and poverty, pandemics and unemployment, along with huge social stratification. The most progressive model of healthcare, which was created in the USSR, made it possible to cope with such problems as mass epidemics and infectious diseases, the lack of qualified medical personnel and high-quality medicines in the shortest possible time. So maybe not the lack of qualified, but yeah. Education became a social good, accessible to everyone. Free education available to all citizens is still recognized as something very fundamental in the world. The economic system of socialism has also proved its efficiency and superiority over capitalist production, defeated Nazi Germany, and cultivated the virgin land, and brought humanity into space. Ongoing social transformations in the USSR resulted in the creation of a new historical community, the Soviet people, which became an example for all nations fighting for independence. Perhaps we can talk about that sometime, Jen, about nations and nationalism and how the Soviet Union managed to deal with this question of having a problematic nation of, starting the point, I suppose you call that. But yeah, let me just carry on. Yes, building a new society, inspiring example of struggle against capitalist oppression. So far, the October Revolution was a powerful source of revolutionary impetus, and it has launched worldwide national liberation struggles. Inspired with the Soviet example, a good deal of countries chose the socialist path of development, and of course, the world colonial system collapsed, aided heavily by the October Revolution and the Soviet Union too, as well as others. Modern capitalism once again has demonstrated its inhumane nature, plunging the world into ever more acute socioeconomic crises, lowering the living standards of millions of people worldwide, and is continuously falling down following non-stop attacks on the most essential rights of the proletariat. Of course, the USA and its allies also interfering in many neo-fascist or supporting many neo-fascist governments, religious extremist groups, and arming against progressive movements. Of course, in such uneasy situation, communist and workers' parties must strengthen the front of resistance to imperialistic expansion and oppose interference in the internal affairs of nations, as well as to the aggressive NATO policy. Yes, the historic argument between capitalism and socialism has not come to the end with the collapse of the USSR. Our strength is in our unity. The cause of the Great October lives on. Socialism will triumph. Cool. Great stuff. That's from the CP of the Russian Federation on the Bolshevik Revolution. So nice and short. Obviously, I read quite fast there, just skimming over stuff. But of course, we cannot not mention the anniversary of the Bolshevik Revolution,
right?
Which happened on the 7th, of course. Yeah. So, any thoughts on that?
Sure.
Quickly summarize your thoughts on the achievements of the Soviet Union.
Yeah. I feel like I do want to point one thing out, which is though everything being said here is technically correct, I'm just going to be fairly blunt with this, and people can argue all they want. But arguing for communism or a perspective of just purely individual rights, that's actually just a completely and absolutely incorrect way to look at things. It's about the progress of civilization. Bringing humanity forward. Yes, during that process, it will bring about a lot of improvement to all individuals that has been living under oppressive conditions. Yes, but that's only the side effect. The principal drive is to build humanity as a collective entity, the Internationale, right?
Yeah.
So then it is okay to advertise to people that to come to communism because there will be all these great things for them. But it must, just as we've learned in dialectics, that nothing is eternal and it must be transcended. The motivation for personal gains must be transcended as well. Yuri Gagarin and any of the Soviet heroes, any of the communist heroes of any communist nation and movement and party, most of them, I would argue 99% of them, did not do it because it was personally good for them. They fought for a future that they will not live to see.
Yeah.
And they are perfectly okay with that. They understood the risks of revolution and sacrifice, and yet they still participated in it.
Right.
Not the kind of Western military stuff. What's the line that you hear in Hollywood movies the most? I didn't sign up for this. Expletive.
Yeah.
No, that's the difference in mentality. So,
yeah.
So this is the kind of faults of many communist parties in the world, because we have lost that optimistic spirit after the defeat of the Soviet Union. So what does that mean? That means that our understanding of material reality is not tied to the working mechanisms of material reality and objective observation, but instead aesthetics of Team Red versus Team Blue in a boxing match. That's it. What? No.
Yeah, it's much bigger than that. It's much more
right. Like you cannot possibly say that Marxism-Leninism is a science and have that kind of attitude about things. Where industry is just when you have red brick buildings and smokestacks. Agriculture is when you have a lot of land and a lot of crops. And technology is when you have lights beeping and steel parts moving. No, we cannot be that rudimentary. That's
no.
Right.
No, there's certainly a grand mission and history on the move there. Yeah, definitely. But yeah, let's move on. So obviously, we wanted to talk about something specific from the communists or the communist parties and their statements. So this, the next one is from the CP of Kazakhstan, so the Communist Party of Kazakhstan, releasing a statement along with 18 other communist and workers' parties from 16 countries. And obviously their statement is against American biological laboratories. Obviously they have a long statement talking about the development of chemical and biological weapons. It's obviously the United States has spent more than $100 billion on offensive biological weapons over the last 20 years. So bear in mind, this is post-Cold War. We're talking about just in the last 20 years, they've spent more than $100 billion US on new offensive biological weapons. And obviously there are other countries that do put money into this too, but their statement, which includes many countries, as I said, Pakistan, Armenia, Kyrgyzstan, Italy, the Philippines, Ukraine, Norway, Hungary, lots of countries signing up, lots of CPs signing up to this statement, which is so calling for the end, the end of more of these labs being opened up and more money being put into this. Because if you think about it, I mean, obviously we're still living in the pandemic, and we don't know exactly yet, but there's still different stories. But about the origin of the virus, the point is that there is at least the potential, if you're developing these kinds of weapons, biological weapons that are diseases and viruses, there is always a risk. As you know, if we kept these things forever, the risk, of something happening, of someone having an accident or something being leaked, or a terrorist attack, even, that there is always the chance that something could be leaked, and then you have a pandemic, which, in this case, certainly would have come from a chemical, biological weapon. So they're calling for the end of this kind of stuff, because it is madness. It is madness to
I want to bring in
money on this stuff, but go ahead.
Some specific facts about this. One, as of current day, there is around 200 plus U.S. biological warfare labs, laboratories around the world, and it is mostly it trespasses the sovereignty and the rights of all people.
If you don't mind me, let me jump in there. Let me just say from the CP of Kazakhstan, they specifically say, we are particularly concerned about the fact that the development of biological weapons continues in many countries. According to the programs of the US Pentagon alone, 1,495 laboratories have been created around the world, which are not accountable to the governments of the countries where they work, and their activities are not transparent. So, as you said, we've got labs creating world-ending disease, viruses and weapons in countries like Pakistan, Iraq, Jordan, all over the world, African American, Latin American countries.
Yeah, it's essentially a ring, according to some maps that do document this kind of stuff, a whole ring around Russia and China, in the Philippines, in Georgia, in Ukraine, so on and so forth, right? So what could that possibly be for, first of all? Secondly, the history of United States with biological weapons is, of course, with the infamous Unit 731. Some YouTubers have done some pretty good documentaries on this. Just type in Unit 731 into the search bar and you'll see. It's a particularly painful memory for all Chinese people, all Korean people, and all Russian people. Essentially, they started. It's Dr. Mengele's human experimentation camps in Nazi Germany on steroids in the city of Harbin in northeastern China that intersects with Russia and Korea, right? Where they started just abducting civilians and committing just straight up war crimes of live human experimentations. And these were supposed to become war criminals that would have been tried at the trial of Tokyo, but the United States helped them to escape because U.S. wanted its own biological warfare program, and so what they did is they kept it hush hush. They helped them clean up their traces and erase evidence, and gave them a big fat paycheck in the United States as advisors. Mansions, cars, champagne, everything. And these absolute demons in human form, right, died naturally of old age and lived a wealthy life ever after. And this is all thanks to the United States. It just objectively is. Sure. Whereas the Soviet Union, even though it did develop its own program, at least had the decency to bring the ones that they got their hands on to the trial of Tokyo and had them hanged, according to international law, which, that shows the difference here. Sure.
Yeah, I mean, you've reminded me, if you're talking about people dying comfortably in their beds of old age, we've had Colin Powell and Donald Rumsfeld die this year. Yeah, and, I mean, I think actually on the day that Rumsfeld died, there was a
100.
No, there was a Serbian, a minor general in the Bosnian Serbian conflict went to the Hague and was sentenced for whichever crime. But it was quite poignant that a far bigger criminal. Much bigger criminal. Never saw a light. Never saw a day in court. Justice was never served, and he died. In comfort. But yes, coming back to the specifics of the biological weapons question or discussion. It seems. I mean, it's just utterly mad to have the US developing these weapons in labs with no oversight from the countries that are hosting them. The weapons that terrible weapons if anything happened, and they're being sort of hosted in far less developed countries, and with minimizing the risk to the US Pentagon and to the US government. Not that the US people should also have these things in their country, risking them too. I mean, just on one thing, it does say here that the United States has not signed the protocol to the International Convention on the Prohibition of the Development, Production, and Stockpiling of Bacteriological and Toxin Weapons. and on their destruction. So they are blocking efforts to actually get that convention ratified, which is really really terrible, really poor stuff.
To be objective, I believe that all 5 members of the United Nations Security Council didn't sign that treaty. So just to keep objectivity here. But I also want to mention that in the United States, there has also been a long-standing tradition of inhumane biological radiological experiments, from anything from the infamous Tuskegee experiments to radiological experiments conducted on homeless, oftentimes black children, to funded by the Pentagon to study the performance of the human body under the conditions of nuclear warfare on homeless black kids that you just give them at the time like $300. That's it. That's all it takes. And we've had radiological experiments where the scientists said that we are testing out this more nutritious experimental brand of cereal, breakfast cereal. Would you like your kids to take part?
And it was what, radioactive or?
It was radioactive. Yes, the minerals.
Right.
Stuff like that. So the wickets of imperialism knows no bounds. That's all I can say to that.
So let's move on to the Belarus and Russia discussion. This is a very interesting one. I mean, there's a lot of news to actually cover with Belarus, and specifically right now with migrants and a border dispute, not a border dispute, but the Polish Belarusians are having quite an intense moment, deploying troops on both sides, migrants involved. It's quite messy. But you specifically want to talk about
the Union State,
the new Union State. So Belarus and Russia forming some sort of new Union State, coming together like old times.
Exactly, with the unified governance system, whilst still maintaining some independent sovereignty, unified the currency, a brand new union, what's called Union State Military Doctrine, where the militaries of Russia and Belarus will be united into one for the defense of the whole realm of the Union State. It's effectively not to make it too dramatic, the rebirth, or at least in the process of rebirthing the USSR. And I say
without the ideology, without the hammer and sickle, but
yes and no. Essentially, we have to understand that the collapse of the Soviet Union was a coup, because there were public elections both in the party and just for the general populations held of would you want to keep the Soviet Union?
The referendum.
The answer was yes, and yet it still was couped by Yeltsin and Gorbachev, obviously, as the collaborator. So that leads to a situation where we have to the bloc is politically dissolved into individual countries. But what is not dissolved is the economics. The infrastructure has been built over the past century in a way that cannot be divided, or else no production works. So, for example, right after the collapse, Ukraine and Russia immediately signed a deal to subsidize oil and trying to balance out the economics to the point where the two would at least function up to a point. So with that kind of reality in mind, and with the very obvious fact that many people in Russia just straight up do not recognize the fall of the Soviet Union, we had towns like Transnistria, which is huge Soviet pride and holdout, right? So this is a part of understand all sociological things can only all superstructure can only exist with a material foundation.
The base.
So without the material foundation of something that resembles a union state, you can't have socialism. So we won't say right now like which direction it's going, but we're very interested in seeing. What's more is the response towards that.
Sure.
November 4th is when this declaration was made by President Putin of Russia and President Lukashenko of Belarus. November 5th, on November 5th, a Russian diplomat fell out of the window of the Russian embassy.
In Berlin.
Of Germany and died mysteriously.
Right. Sorry. Yes. Okay. No, different story. But yes. Sorry. Okay. I thought there's something funny there, but no. Okay.
Right now, a few days ago, and right now as we speak, Ukrainian troops has marched all the way into Donbass again, and is only 20 plus kilometers away from the Russian border. And the United States has taken off its air warning, air command aircrafts and F-15E fighters, which is one of the top of the line, what's called Generation 3++ fighters, essentially in support of the Ukrainian operation. So what's interesting about this is that it's not covered in English media at all. I challenge everyone to look it up on Google and YouTube. You'll be very hard pressed to find it.
Sure.
Two, it's covered by CGTN and CCTV, China Central Television, obviously. So there is international coverage on that for sure, just not in English-speaking media.
Yeah, it's not
on NATO's official website, there has been no response as well. So that begs the question: what is the Western powers up to? But they are clearly doing military and espionage in response to this, right? As we've previously mentioned. So that is a very interesting situation to observe. If for nothing else, Russia and Belarus are all anti-imperialist countries. So at the very least, so as socialists, as communists of the world, we should definitely be keeping a close eye on that. And
sure. Yeah, I mean, as you detailed there, so the tension in that region, sort of that Ukraine, Belarus, Poland sort of region, as well as Latvia, Lithuania, the sort of eastern edges of Europe. The regional tension is ratcheting up there. But yeah, you do make an interesting point there about the infrastructure, sort of the fact that economically, in terms of production, in terms of electricity, gas, particularly gas, the Soviet Union's infrastructure still is, spread across the former republics as well as into Eastern Europe. So that still exists in that sense. But you said that obviously with this union, just go over the details again. So they obviously haven't. It hasn't happened yet. This is obviously, we're building up to it. They're coming up with the framework, probably the legal framework, and how it will be phrased and how it will work. But you said a new currency, potentially.
Unified currency. So the idea of a union state has been thrown around ever since 1996.
Sure.
But it has been through so much difficulties, and people didn't think it was possible. But now the two presidents have officially spoken that it is going to be a thing. Earliest by 2022 next year, latest by 2023 a year. So
they would effectively be one country.
Yes.
Or would it be a bloc? So one country, as opposed to being a defensive pact like NATO, or
yes, correct. They would be one country, much. It would be the union of the not we don't know if it's Soviet, but let's hope they are.
I think we can fairly say it's probably
states. If it would be Union of Republics and States, that's what it will be.
Union of Republican States.
Yeah. So they are going to have the same administration, the same currency, the same a unified military, the same military central command. So much like how the USSR was set up. It is one country, but it has different republics.
Different republics. Okay, interesting. So we'll see that. So potentially 2022, we might see that coming out into full sense. So obviously not much left of 2021, but next year. I think one more thing we need to cover, which quite recent. Obviously the Sandinistas.
Yes.
Elections in Nicaragua. First thing I would just like to say about this, and we'll hear what you have to say, Jen, is on the BBC's Global News podcast, they obviously, slurred and sort of really marred and tried to sort of cast shade on the election there. But they specifically said,
Typical.
I remember this line, they said, foreign journalists, foreign reporters have not been allowed in to Nicaragua to observe this. And that's what the BBC said. They reported that. And I know that that's not true. I know that's false, because just by my own sort of very small limited feed, I know that Caleb Maupin is a journalist.
Oh, yeah.
He has gone there.
Go there.
Yes, so the BBC reported no journalists, no foreign journalists or reporters have been allowed in. No, that is a completely false. So, any thoughts on the Nicaraguan elections and the victory of the Sandinistas?
Okay, a few things. The journalist point real quick.
Sure.
The CIA literally will post as journalists when they go to countries that they are trying to harass and or destroy.
Sure.
So, like, even if it was true that no Western journalists were allowed, that would still be an understandable situation. Although that is clearly not true, so I just want to get that out of the way. Secondly, this is a sign of two things. One, the tide of the world, the trend of the world is changing. Essentially, the American wave that peaked after 1991 is going down. And that is the macro and contextual reason why in the future, with the Sandinista people and comrades as the first, we will see the rise and in success of socialism increasingly. More of the world. It'll be like waking up from hibernation of sorts.
Sure.
But slowly but surely, things will pick up pace, and that is a brilliant first step. Secondly is relate this to another news, and we'll see that this is overall just like America's power has declined so much that it cannot even maintain the Monroe Doctrine anymore.
Right, and the Monroe Doctrine does seem to be it's strained at the moment.
Yeah. So the event is this: in Haiti, there has been a terrorist group that it's a local mafia, a gang that loves to pose itself and posture itself as if it was a terrorist organization. And it's like asking for ransom from governments by arresting hostage and stuff like that. Kidnapping. Sorry. What did they do? Well, they kidnapped a few American Christian missionaries, evangelical Christian missionaries. Yeah. If this was how Hollywood movie would have portrayed it, then we would have at least been seeing like a Black Hawk Down level of military operation. Like, where are the Navy SEALs? Where's the aircraft carrier? Right. But so far, the American government, the British government, I believe there was one British citizen, I believe, within the group. But mainly, the American government hasn't done anything. Hasn't covered the news. American media has not covered it much. It's just been pushed to the periphery. And that's the way that the U.S. government is dealing with this. Essentially, we are busy right now. We don't care. You're an American citizen. Yes, we say we are going to defend you, but we don't care.
Sure.
So to tie that with the Sandinista situation, I believe they will actually have a bright future.
Sure.
Specifically because of just how much America has weakened, even in South America, even in Haiti, where the whole thing about U.S. having a puppet president there, and then the president got assassinated by Americans. American puppet president got assassinated by Americans who escaped towards the Taiwanese delegation's building, and so on and so forth. Yeah, that's called a sign of weakness.
Sure. I mean, for me personally, if you're talking about signs of weaknesses and not standing up for your citizens, or not standing up for something that at least represents you, I think a big, glaring, massive slap to the face or sign of this weakness, as you're talking about it, was when that Jamal Khashoggi, a journalist, was butchered by Saudi. And bear in mind that guy was a Washington Post
Yeah.
contributor, journalist,
Uh-huh.
and he wasn't a U.S. citizen, but he was a U.S. national. So this was a guy who wrote for the Washington Post, had interviewed and had been and spoken to and stood on panels with many congressmen and many people as a part of the U.S. establishment, and to have that guy chopped up into pieces, and the whole world to know that a Washington Post journalist
probably should have put a
national
trigger warning, but apologies.
Into pieces, that was as a sign of showing where your true
allegiances are, and what your true
oil rather than the I mean, what's the catchphrase? Democracy dies in darkness is Washington Post's and it seems like democracy dies in oil, actually, to be honest.
Speaking of that, the U.S. Navy recently just tried to hijack an oil tanker, Iranian oil tanker, off of the coast of Iran, which was then they were pushed back and driven away by the Iranian maritime forces. In Syria, there's been reports of U.S. troops escorting convoys of literally just oil trucks being out of Syrian oil fields. What on earth is that? You are supposed to be a superpower, an empire, and like the people, American forces resort to this kind of shoddy behavior of like petty thieves.
Sure.
That's anyways.
But we're digressing now, so we can cover some of that stuff next week. But we've obviously covered our headlines. Any of the people who are watching and who will be watching later, if you have any things that you would like us to cover, or any stories particularly that we think we missed that we can then cover and pick up next week, please just comment and comment below and leave us your thoughts. Obviously, you can email us at admin@marxistthinktank.com.org. Sorry, and that's the end of our second episode of the MTT News of the Week. So again, we will be here next week, the same time, 8:30 in Beijing time or China time. Obviously, respectively different zones. So 7:30 in the evening in Ohio East Coast time. So look forward to the next one, and we'll be back next week. Thank you very much, Jen, and thank you very much to everyone who's watching and to people who will listen to.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.